Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, Micah Curtis here, and before we get started with today's video, I just want to remind you guys that 3 Nights, 4 Days Part 2 is still live on Indiegogo, and we are getting closer and closer and closer to that 11K goal, and God, we're so close I can taste it, because we're a little over $3,000 away. And if you haven't backed the book yet, we're 2/3 of the way there. We got 5 more days to go to the end of the first 30 days. Let's get this funded before we get there, guys. You know, we're almost there. I can taste it. You can taste it. We can all taste it. And it tastes freaking delicious. So pick the book up. I think you're really going to enjoy it. You know, the interesting thing about this for me is that I'm starting off shilling with a non-superhero book when, to be honest with you, if there's any one thing I like writing, it's superheroes. Now, one thing that I have seen myself doing less and less of since I've started writing my own stories is I don't watch nearly as much superhero stuff. In fact, when it comes right down to it, like, I haven't watched much of the MCU since Endgame. In fact, I don't know if I've watched an MCU film all the way through since Endgame. And I haven't really watched many other superhero films except for, I think, Suicide Squad? That might be the only one, the James Gunn version. And I really liked that one. That one was a lot of fun. But it's superhero in the sense that it's, you know, a DCEU film that's not about actual superheroes, if you get my drift. But anyway, this is actually about the Batman, the most recent film that rumor has it might have had a stolen script. I don't really care. That's not my problem with it. My problem with it, oddly enough, isn't even anything that has to do with like the current political zeitgeist or anything along those lines. Rather, my big gripe with this particular film is in its writing. Nothing against the guy who made it. I think his name is Matt Reeves. But the issue that I have with this is that this film is emblematic of why I think that the superhero genre is going to start to fall off in films, and honestly why I think the superhero genre is in a position where a lot of modern writers simply can't write it, and that's because it's way too freaking cynical. So this is probably the darkest in tone of any Batman film that's ever been. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of Batman stories that are very dark in tone. However, the issue that I have with this is that you're basically being introduced to a Bruce Wayne that is more dark and more brooding than usual. To a point where when he's actually out and about as Bruce Wayne, he barely talks, he never smiles, and to be honest, is just kind of at a point where I started wondering if this version of Bruce had Asperger's syndrome. He just didn't have any social graces, no nothing. And it's kind of unfortunate because, well, that's not how Bruce acts in the comics, and, you know, I would have hoped that he would have taken more inspiration from that. The other issue that I have, of course, is that the film is trying a little too hard to lean into sort of the serial killer genre of filmmaking, sort of like a Silence of the Lambs type story. And the problem that I get from it is that there are elements where Paul Dano's Riddler honestly comes across as just trying way too hard to be Hannibal Lecter. Not to mention, this isn't the Riddler. Not at all. This is the character of Anarchy from the comics, but the difference is that they took Anarchy and they gave him a green mask. They did that mostly because, well, the Riddler is more easily identifiable. Yes, I know they were trying to go for a Zodiac killer, influence, yada yada yada. I get that, but the way that he's presented, he just doesn't come across like the Riddler. The Riddler just isn't that type of a character, and it's unfortunate that they decided to do the character like that, because I think Paul Dano is a very good actor. I really liked him in There Will Be Blood. But anyway, the whole tone of this film and the way that they change Bruce Wayne's backstory and the backstory of his family and things like that, honestly, comes across as, again, way too cynical. It's a little bit contrived for certain things to be happening that shows that, oh, all these people that you thought were great really aren't that great, and yada, 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 and that's a cynic talking whenever that sort of thing happens. Now, by the way, I am by no means against stories with a bunch of shades of gray, but this is Batman we're talking about. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, Micah, Batman is always brooding, and there's shades of gray, and blah, 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 blah. And I would ask what Batman you've been reading. You see, the issue that I have with this sort of thing, and with a lot of people when it comes to superheroes in general, is they don't really understand the characters that they're writing. Yes, Batman is brooding. Yes, Batman uses fear against his enemies, which is a very dark concept. Yes, Batman is a moody prick sometimes, but he is not, and I repeat, is not a cynical human being. Now, let me explain this for a second. Batman, Bruce Wayne, as a person, understands that he represents something. Not just vengeance, like they put in here, which was, again, kind of cringy, because there were people calling him Vengeance as, like, some sort of really bad mockery. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with calling him Bat Freak or something? What the crap, dude? But anyway, Bruce Wayne, Batman, is not a cynical human being. He has every right to be a cynical human being, but he is not that cynical. He lacks certain social graces, and he is a character that kind of refuses to address what anyone who's familiar with Jungian psychology would call his shadow. He refuses to address that part of his psyche that is troubled from the loss of his parents. It's something that always drives him to take vengeance and be the knight and all that other stuff that everybody rips off from Kevin Conroy's version of the character. But what people tend to neglect is that even though Bruce is on a mission of vengeance against the criminal underbelly, the thing that you have to keep in mind is he also believes in things that are bigger than himself, and that these ideas that are more than just what he is and what he could be inside that cape are the things that are worth standing up for, because those things are good and those things are something that is worth fighting for. Things along the lines of truth and justice and the idea that, good will prevail. That is what Bruce Wayne believes. He believes that, every person should have their day in court. He believes that life is a precious thing. These are oddly enough ideas that most Americans believe in and believe in very strongly. But the problem we're dealing with is that this was just written by some dude in Hollywood. And the problem with Hollywood these days is that the Hollywood circles, we'll just put it that way, are incredibly cynical about those ideas because they seem to believe that everything is relative. And the problem with thinking that everything is relative is all of a sudden everything becomes cynical. You start second guessing why people believe certain things. You start second guessing whether or not these things are actually good, so on and so forth, even though there's plenty of evidence that, yes, concepts like justice and truth and so on and so forth are static and good things that are worth defending. And that's what characters like a Batman are supposed to represent. Let's compare for just a bit, if you will, between the Robert Pattinson version of the Batman, which, by the way, one thing I should say real quick about the Batman as a film. A lot of the acting in this movie was very good. It's just, I didn't like how the story was told. It's a personal taste sort of thing, and it's just something that I feel is a problem with modern superhero films. But let's compare Robert Pattinson's Batman to Christian Bale's Batman. Christian Bale's Batman, though he could be very brooding and be very dark, he was, in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, the closest Bruce Wayne / Batman that felt like he leapt off of the comic book pages. Because this was a Bruce that was focused. This was a Bruce that allowed himself to smile and to laugh. This was a Bruce that legitimately felt righteous in what he was doing because he believed that he was doing the right thing. He took confidence in that. And as such, he became a very easy and very enjoyable version of the character to watch. The interesting balance of Batman is that you want to still have a Bruce Wayne that can be Bruce Wayne, that can be a human being, that could be the kind of guy that if you happen to sit next to him at a, like a coffee bar, he would strike up conversation with you if you started one with him. And he would laugh at the jokes and things like that. He wouldn't just stare at you like you got a second head. That is the kind of Bruce Wayne that Bruce Wayne is. And Christian Bale, he really nailed that element. He also nailed the idea that Bruce Wayne has a public persona and a private persona, things of that nature. Robert Pattinson, the direction he was given in this was not that. And again, it comes across as too cynical and too brooding, because it doesn't come across that Bruce in the Batman believes in anything except for vengeance. And the problem with that is that Batman at no point was ever like that. Yes, he wants to take vengeance on the streets for the injustices that has happened to him and his family, but at the same time, he realizes that there's something bigger out there than him, and that as Batman, as a symbol, he can basically take that idea onto himself, resemble it, give it a form, and then make it something that people either cheer for or fear, and it can maneuver and influence the world into a positive direction. And the interesting thing about that to me is I really feel like that is the mentality that many heroes in DC Comics really have. If you look at a character like a Superman or a Batman or anybody from the Justice League, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Hawkman, so on and so forth, Captain Marvel, Shazam, for those who don't know and aren't old like me. You look at these characters and you see and you think of the things that they represent. The Green Lantern represents willpower, which isn't really an emotion, but it's something that resembles the thing that carries you through the toughest times. And in a sense, the Green Lantern is a beacon for that. Every single Green Lantern, has had to face fear and use his willpower to push through it, because ultimately that is a story about our everyday life. Superman represents truth, justice, and the American way. It's what he stands for. It's what he believes in, because he believes that there is truth. He believes that justice should always be served and that the scales should always be balanced. He believes in the American way because, well, he's a Midwestern Kansas boy who moved to, well, I believe it's Illinois, but I don't know where Metropolis actually is in DC Comics. I always forget. But I've been to Metropolis, Illinois, by the way. It's a nice place. But anyway, as it stands, he's an American, and he believes in American values, or at least he did until, modern DC screwed it up, which, again, is because too many modern writers are cynical. Wonder Woman is the same way. I always felt like her big thing was bravery in the face of, overwhelming odds, and kind of breaking barriers, which is what she did. And then, of course, you can go through the rest of, the Justice League. I always felt like the Flashes resembled hope, because they were always very hopeful people. Jay was always a very hopeful person. Barry was and is always a hopeful person. Same with Wally before they ruined him. So, needless to say, these are people that are paragons. These are people who understand that it's not just about protecting my identity. I represent something to this world when I put on this mask, and what I represent means something. Now, the problem we run into, and I'll reiterate this, when it comes to doing DC Comics, is we have too many freaking people out there that are so set on this weird feeling of relative morality that they honestly don't think that anybody can be a paragon of anything, which misses the point of superhero comics. These are supposed to be the best of us. These are supposed to be the people that, for whatever reason, are able to be those paragons of truth and justice and so on and so forth. They are able to take that upon themselves because they, well, again, they're the best of us. They resemble what me and you and all of us really want to be at the end of the day. I'll flat out say I would love to be like a Hal Jordan. Not just because he, slays mad puss, but more than anything, it's because, and Hal Jordan is my favorite DC hero, is what Hal represents in that willpower, and the will to face all of these temptations and these emotions and stay strong and stay true to yourself and to push forward and do the right thing, which is why I love that character. And I honestly hope that they never try another Green Lantern movie because they're never going to get it in this modern day and age. It's probably going to take another decade. But when it comes right down to it, I am honestly of the opinion that DC characters are getting it worse than anybody because there's a lot of people out there that aren't willing to really allow these characters to be the paragons of what they are. Now, granted, I have to say this. I have not seen Aquaman, though I have heard a lot of really good things. And I have not seen Shazam either, though I have heard a lot of really good things. And I hear that those two films actually move in a good direction towards what I probably would really like and what I've always liked about DC heroes, But then again, it'll probably be forever till I actually watch those films. This is how bad I am at putting stuff off. I just only read the Great Darkness saga a month ago. I know I'm terrible. But anyway, that's my gripe basically with the Batman, and that's my gripe with a lot of people taking on modern DC comics. You're all too fucking cynical to do it, man. Like, take 5 minutes, get your head out of Hollywood's ass, meet some normal people, talk to some normal dudes and normal chicks, and get to know actual people who do believe in these things still in this little wonderful place we call flyover country. And I promise you, once you start to understand what the rest of us understand, you can actually write superheroes a lot better because you start to realize that, yeah, these concepts still matter to people. Yeah, the whole idea of everything being relative is fucking stupid. And at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with a character being a paragon of truth, justice, and the American way, or in this particular case, well, truth, justice, and vengeance. Alright, all jokes aside, thank you all so much for listening to my little rant here. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell on your way out if you would please, and then of course, Back 3 Nights, 4 Days, Part 2, live on Indiegogo. Also, if you missed out, Englewood Book 2 is still in demand. You can pick that up as well. Recently hit 15K. Preston Acevedo has submitted the pencils for the alternate cover on this comic. I will be revealing, hopefully, the finished thing. If not, I'll reveal the pencils at the end of the week. With all that said, my name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla. God bless every single one of you, and have yourselves a great rest of your day.